Today we're going to focus on low code features. So we are going to show how to build this code inside Jester. It's an automation, and we are going to use a request process as an example. So we are not going to build the structure of the app on this live. However, we are going to show you how to access low code, how does it work, how to code inside Jester. We are going to give you an example using Python, but Jester also allows you to use PHP and .NET. So the idea here is to build this request process with dual approval. So we're going to add more than one rule for your process. You could also do a similar process using no code on Jasper, but here we are going to use low code just to show you that even though there's code there, it's easy to use, easy to edit, and it's really flexible for any other kind of need that you have, internal or even connecting with other tools. So Nakandakari, the idea here is to show them this app and low code. Do you want to show anything else also on this live?
Yeah, so the idea behind this live stream is that we're going to showcase the low code features. So, we've said before, it's not about building the app itself. It's not about building the table, building the interface, and it's especially not a Python lesson. Okay, so it's not regarding the code itself. There are probably many people that are going to say, "Oh, you could have done this better. You should have validated that." And it's valid, but the idea here is not
This
that
just
we're going
proves
to
that
focus.
even if your code is not good, it will work on low code. So you don't need to
Exactly.
do everything when you're talking about low code. Uh, One thing about low code is the low part is really more important than the code part. So the code part gives you flexibility, but the low part is where Jester just gives you more and more tools to spend less time coding and more time automating processes.
Exactly. So think about this as more of a process building with low code and less about the code itself. So the idea here is just to show how you would build a simple payment request process with dual approval. So what do I mean by dual approval? So let's go to the structure that we've already built. So this is a payment request board. So you have this Kanban board with payment requests. We have a form in which we can create a new payment request. So the idea here is that every new payment request that is submitted through the form, which I can also come through here and edit, it's going to first fall into first approval, and then we have the approve and reject buttons. And you can see that every request has a category, so marketing, finance, and stuff like that. And one thing that we can do is if we go to the table regarding such categories, we have here information regarding the first approver, the second approver, and a single approval maximum. So the idea here is that the only people that can approve requests are the ones in these fields, right? So for finance, I'm the first approver and I'm the second approver also. For marketing, there's a different person as a first approver, but I'm the second approver. And for tech, I'm the first approver, but there's a different person that's the second approver. And what do I mean by first and second approver? So we have the single approval maximum, which is basically a threshold for determining if you need a single person approving or if you need two people approving. So let's take an example here. So let's create a new request. So let's go with new coffee machine, and we're going to put that into finance. And we're going to put the limit as the amount as 2,500, and we're just going to submit anything around here. Okay, so here it is. Here's the card. So the idea here is that this is a finance request. So if I look at finance, I'm the first approver, and so I can click on this button, and it's going to send the new coffee machine to second approval. I'm also the second approver, so I can click on approve, and then it's going to go to approved. So the thing is, this card needed a second approval because the amount is greater than the single approval maximum. If I had a different request, so I'm going to go with, I don't know, new monitor. It's also finance, and I'm going to go with $500. So I'm just going to send information here. So this is also finance, and I'm the first approver, but the amount is 500, and that is below the single approval maximum. So what happens is if I press approve here, it's not going to go to second approval. It's going to go directly to approved. What happens if I try to approve banners, which is in the marketing category? Marketing, I'm not the first approver. So if I click on approve, it's going to send me a warning. You're not the approver for this request, and nothing else happens. I can't also reject it because I'm not the approver for this request. So the idea here is basically that I always have this kind of one or two approvers depending on the amount of the purchase and depending on the theme of the purchase, and only the person selected as first or second approver can click on the button. If they click on the button that and they're not allowed to, I'm just going to send an error message and they're not going to see anything. Like we said before, you could also do this with no code possibly, but it would be a lot more complicated because it would need a lot of generic rules, and you would have to combine a lot of different automations in one workflow. So the advantage of doing this with low code is that I can have a single automation and have this kind of complex validation without having to spread into a different set of automations. So let's just, before we start building, let's just talk about the low code area. So if I wanted to create a new low code automation, the place that I would have to go is here on automation. I can click on low code and it's going to bring me to the low code area. So the low code area has a couple of a few interesting things here. So first of all, we have the tables. So tables are the databases themselves. So for example, request categories is a table, payment requests here is a table. So the idea here is that I have a list of all the tables in my account, and I can click on one of them to see all the fields and all the API names for these fields. So whenever you create a field or a table inside Jastor, they have this unique name that you cannot change later. So for example, if I changed the due date here to, I don't know, deadline, the API field name would not change because if that happened, you would break all of your automations. So this name, the field name or the table ID is not going to change. So this is very important. So if you need to check the API name for something, you can come here to the API tables. So there are a few other interesting things here. You have in low-code tools, you have functions and triggers. So what's the difference between functions and triggers? They're both low-code automations. So they're both codes that you're running in a given situation. So it's what I have here on my screen. So this is a function. So they're essentially the same thing. What changes between them is when they're going to run, right? So function is a low-code automation that runs when you click on a button, when you activate it through a webhook, for example, or when you call the low-code automation amidst the no-code automations. So you can also do that. You can like make an automation that when you create a record, you run one no-code automation, a second no-code automation, and then you can run a low-code automation in the middle of all the actions. So functions are low-code automations that run when you click on a button, when you call through a webhook, or when you want to run this low-code automation with the no-code automations. And triggers are basically low-code automations that always run given a certain event in a table. And what do I mean by that? So I'm going to go to triggers. It's going to be a little bit more clear. So if I try to create a new trigger, I can name the trigger. So I'm just going to call it example. I can select the table, for example, appointments. I can select a programming language. I'm going to go with Python. And then I select the conditions that are going to run, make the trigger run. So for example, I can always run an automation after a record is created, as soon as I create a card. I can run this automation when a record is updated. So for example, if I drag the card in the Kanban board, I'm going to run an automation. So triggers are essentially low-code automations that run based on events on the table. So when a record is created, when a record is updated, or when a record is deleted, then you can run a trigger. Apart from that, they're essentially the same stuff, and you're going to have the same methods and the same possibilities in both triggers and functions, but they have that thing that sets them apart. And besides that, we also have webhooks here. And basically, webhooks are URLs that you create for tables or functions. So for example, I can create a appointment webhook for the table appointments, and this is going to provide me with an endpoint in which I can send information, and it's going to create a new record in the appointments table. So I can just send the raw data for the name of the appointment, the due date of the appointment, and it's not going to treat anything. It's just going to take in the data and create a new appointment. So this is the webhook for appointments. But we can also, instead of using webhooks for tables, we can use it for functions. So if I select a function here, for example, approve, this is going to provide me with a link with an endpoint in which I can send information or just access it through the browser, and it's going to run that function. So this means that I can create a function, create an endpoint for that function, and then an external platform can send information to that endpoint, and I'm going to run a function, I'm going to treat that information and do whatever I want Gesture to do, right? So basically, you can run this combo of function and webhook, so you have this custom endpoint that does whatever you want it to do. So before I start building the automation itself, I also want to say that you can access the documentation here through the low-code area as well. I already have it open here on a different tab. So basically, if you go to our guides, you can see here that I have Python native methods, and this is going to be crucial for me to use the low-code area. Essentially, these are native methods and variables that I have inside Gesture in the low-code area, right? So maybe you know Python, maybe you know PHP, but you're still going to need some knowledge of what can I do specifically in Gesture, right? So how do I create a record inside Gesture? How in which variable is the data from the record, from the Kanban board card stored? So this is going to be all in this guide. So you can see here in the guide that we have like current data is the information sent by the user when they do something. We have the variable current user, which is basically a variable that stores the information from the user who set the automation running, right? So if someone drags a card in the Kanban board, all the information from the person who dragged the card is going to be in current user. And then you have the native methods. If I want to create a record, if I want to edit a record, if I want to delete a record, it's all here. So basically, this is all the prior knowledge that you're going to need to build stuff in low code, right? So let's rebuild what we have here. So let's go back here to the request board. So basically, what I want here is a button to approve and a button to reject. And also, we want this validation, right? So I want to see if the person who clicked on approve is the person who has the permission to approve things, and so on. So we're going to recreate these buttons. We're going to recreate the code for the buttons. So let's go back to
That's interesting, like to say as well, is you can combine no code with low code. So in the same automation, you could have a no code automation for sending an email, and then a low code automation afterwards, and then a no code automation again, and so on. Because basically, what you do is you can invoke low code automations. They don't need to be invoked sometimes because the way that you can set the automation, but you could add this to another no code trigger. Maybe you could just add this to a button. That's the example that we are going to do right now. But a few automations, they don't even need to do anything else besides being activated after you code them. So you can use both words to, so part of your automation is no code, part is low code, and you can find the best spot for your process.
exactly. So what we're going to do here is, like I said before, what we have here is an automation that's running through this button, right? It's going to run as soon as I click on approve or click on reject. So if I have an automation that I want to run through a button, I need a function. So I'm going to create a new function and I'm going to call it approve live stream, just to differentiate between the one that I already have here. And for this live stream, we're going to use Python. We have .NET, we have PHP, so you can select the language that makes the most sense to you. So I'm going to click on save, and you can see that I've already created the function right here, and I can enter it, access it, and start editing. So let's think about what I want, right? So if I click on approve when it's on the stage, first approval, I have to check two things. First, am I the person who is the first approver for that specific category? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, so I have to check on that. And also, is that below the single approval maximum threshold? So this is also one thing that I have to check, right? So let's start building stuff. So first thing that I'm going to check is if I'm on the first approval stage, right? So let's start with if, and then the first question pops up, which is where's the information? So which variable am I going to use? So I'm going to go to the docs, to our guides, and you're going to see that we have this information here. So whenever I run a function through a button, all the information from the card, from the record, it's going to be stored in record data. So I'm just going to copy this, if record data, and then I'm going to access one value in a specific part of the record. And then I know that on the interface, it's status, but I'm not sure about the variable name. So one thing that I can do, I can click here to access the builder mode. I can click here on the three dots and access API tables IDs. And then I can see all the information, all the API names of all the fields. So the one that I want is status all lowercase. So I'm going to copy that, and the condition is if record data status is first approval, then I'm going to do something, right? So if it's on first approval, I have to check two things. First of all, am I allowed to click on approve? Am I the first approver? So I'm going to check that. If record data, I'm going to get this variable here, category, and there's an important thing happening here, which is if I look at the structure here of the payment requests, here you go. You can see that this is a connection field, right? So this is a connection to a different table, in this case, to the record finance in this table. And in this table, I have the first approver. So because I have this connection, I can access it directly through the variable itself, which is first approver. right? So I can get information directly because I have this connection. One important thing that I have to warn people about is that this only works for first level connections, right? If I had a connection inside a connection inside a connection, I cannot use that information. Then I'm going to have to perform searches, which we also have a guide here. Basically, it's the list records native method. But if I have a connection within a connection within a connection, then I'm going to have to perform searches to get that information. But the first level of connections I can access directly. So if I come back here to the first approver, there's a user here. And basically, users are identified by a unique numerical ID. So one user is 1, one user is 10, one user is 17. So each user has their own ID. And I'm going to just make sure that what I'm seeing here is a number. Okay, so I'm going to compare this. So the first approver, I'm going to compare with the person who clicked on the button. So if I come back here, I can see that this information is stored on current user. So I can come back here, current user, and get the ID of the user. Okay, so if the person who pressed, so who clicked on the button is the first approver, then I'm going to still check something, which is if it's in the single approval maximum, right? On the threshold to go directly to approved. So I'm going to get this information as well. Just let me check the ID of the field so I don't mess this up. And then I can just copy this. And basically, so what I'm going to check here is if the amount of the card is less or equal to the single approval maximum. There we go. So I've checked these 3 steps, right? So if it's below the single approval maximum threshold, I'm going to send it to approve. If it's not, I'm going to send it to second approval. How do I change the status, the stage of the card? I can come back here to native methods and see that I have this method for edit record, right? So I'm just going to copy it. And here we go. It's gesture.table and the ID or name of the table, dot update, record ID, and the information that I want to change. So for the table name, it's important to note that it's not requests, categories, or anything like that. It's not payment requests. It's this ID that's unique. It's right here below the name of the table. We've already explained this, but basically this is unchangeable because if it changed, it would break all of your automations. So this ID doesn't ever change. So this is why we're using this. So I'm going to go to that table and I'm going to update the record that I've just clicked on. And the ID of the record is always ID underscore and the name of the table. So record data is the information from the card itself, and I'm going to get the ID of the card. All right, so first status, we're going to send to approved. All right, so what would happen if it's not below the single approval maximum threshold, right? If it's not below this, what I want to happen, and then I'm just going to copy and paste here, is that I'm not going to send it to approved. I'm going to send it to second approval, right? So we're going to need a second approval on that. Okay, and now we're going to the other condition. So just to run things over again. When I click on the button, I'm going to check if the status is first approval. If it's first approval, I'm going to check if the person who clicked on the button is the person who can approve. And if it is, I'm either going to send to approved or to second approval. But if it's not the person who has permission, who is the approver of the record, then I'm going to send an error message, which is also here, right? Stop code execution. It basically stops the automation and sends a warning. So basically, I'm going to say you're not allowed to approve this record. Okay, so this is basically it. And now we have everything done for the first approval. Now we're going to do it for the second approval. So we're going to use elif. Basically, if it's not first approval, but if it is second approval, and I'm just going to change that, I'm going to do the same thing and check if it's the person who has permission to approve, right? Forgot about int here as well, so I'm just going to add this. And instead of checking for first approver, I'm going to check for second approver. Okay, so if the person who clicks on the button now is the second approver, I'm going to send the record to approved. If it's not, I'm going to say you don't have permission, you're not allowed to approve this record. So that was a little bit simpler. And now I have the other condition, which is if it's not in first approval, if it's not in second approval, it's either approved or already rejected. So I'm just going to send a message of this request is already finished. So this is the code. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't think so. I think it's everything is right. I may be wrong. We're going to test that. So, okay, I've created the low-code automation itself. So now what I can do here is I'm going to go back to the table itself, right? So now I'm going to edit this button. Just 1 second. There you go. So I'm going to edit this button. This is an automation button, and it's going to run the automation that I've just created, right? So here it is. When a button field is clicked, so when I click on this button, it's going to run a function. And the function that it's going to run is the approve live stream function that I've just created. It's this one, right? So let's click on save. And let's see if it worked, right? So let's go back to the request board. So let's see the marketing request. I'm going to click on approve. You're not allowed to approve this record. Let's create an IT, a tech request. It's going to be, I don't know, laptops, and it's going to be $10,000. So for this request, we can see that it's a tech request, and for tech, I'm the first approver, but I'm not the second approver. So if I click on this, it goes to second approval. So let's just refresh this. It came back here to second approval. And if I click on approve again, I'm not allowed to approve this record because I'm not the second approver. It's Dr. Penguin. You can see it here on the table. So it's working as intended. Let's try just to approve something that it's already in approved or rejected. So let's click on approve. this request is already finished. So everything is working as intended. So all I have to do now is create a function for reject. So I'm going to come back here, create reject live string. For programming language is also going to be Python. And basically, it's the same thing, right? So let's just get the same code. So we're going to check if it's in first approval. If it's in first approval, I'm going to check if I have permission to approve this. If I have it, I'm going to send it to rejected. And if I don't have permission to approve this, I'm going to send a message. You can't reject this request. So now I'm going to do the same thing for second approval. So if I'm the second approver, then I'm going to send it forward to rejected, or else I'm going to reject. I'm going to send an error message, and if it's not in first approval or second approval, I'm just going to send an error message for request closed. So this one was a lot quicker because I already had created most of the code for it. I'm just copying and pasting it. So this is the code. If it's in first approval and I'm the approver, I can reject it, or else I get an error message. Same thing for second approval. If I'm not the second approver, I'm going to get an error warning. And if it's not in first approval, if it's not in second approval, it's probably in approved or rejected. This means the request is already closed and I shouldn't have to do anything else. So let's go back to payment requests, and we're going to substitute the function for the one we have just created. So let's switch on builder mode, edit the automation. When I click on it, when I click on the reject button, I'm going to run a function. The function that I'm going to run is the one that I've just created. And I can click on save, and there you go. So it's already on the button. I'm going to go back to the request board. So if I try to reject banners, which is for marketing, I'm going to click on reject. You can't reject this request because I'm not the first approver, right? But I am the second approver for laptops because it's in tech. I'm not the approver for this one. So let's just create a new request, right? Let's go with finance, accounting. So we have to pay the accounting firm. It's going to go to $1,000. So maybe the invoice is missing, so I cannot pay them, and I can click on reject, and it sent it right to rejected. So this is basically it. The idea here is to show this automation, how to create these low-code automations, how to assign them to buttons and so on. And one thing that's really important in all of this is that you can always mix stuff, right? So for example, if I click on reject, it's going to send it to rejected. But then I can also come here in the builder mode and then create automations, no-code automations to say if it's in rejected, send an email. If it's in rejected, send a message in a channel inside Jester. So you can always mix no-code and low-code automations. I'm not going to delve into much detail here, but the idea here is that you can mix this stuff. And if you want to create very specific automations, if you want to create something that has some kind of rule that's a little bit more complex, like for example, this one, you can see that we have a lot of if conditions. So there's a tree of decisions, right? So if this, if this, if this, if not this, and then you have this decision making. that you think that's going to work a little bit better in low code, you have the low code tools here, so you can always create this with, as you can see here, for this part, it's like 15 lines of code. It could be a little bit more efficient. I'm not a programmer. Or maybe there were some other steps that you want to do to add a little bit more security to the process. But the idea here is that, like, we're going on here for about 30 minutes, but if I didn't have to explain all of this to you guys as I'm doing it, this would probably be done in like 5 to 10 minutes. So it's a very simple way to build more complex processes.
Yeah, perfect. Next week we will come back with another video. We will also add this video to the documentation. And if you guys have any other questions, you can also send to request@jastor.email. And if you want more videos explaining how low code is built, or maybe permissioning, so on, or more complex features, also send a text to us or comment on this video, and then we can add to our videos that we add to lives and so on. So see you guys next week, and we'll probably have other videos today about new features on the channel as well. Bye bye.